exclaimed your proclamations, but they fell on crowded ears, with everybody clamoring for contact, and extinction pollinating all their fears. Wasted entertainment, city boy becomes a city rat. There's a moth line on a bottle of ammonia, and we're selling tickets just to see how they react. You can stand above me looking down, but I can see from here it's just a broken ladder. And I would trade my place with you in hell, cause I can say for sure it doesn't even matter. You can stand above me looking down, but I can see from here it's just a broken ladder. And I would trade my place with you in hell, cause I can say for sure it doesn't even matter. You exclaimed your proclamations, pour another drink. If your cynicism outweighs the pollution, then it always feels encouraging to sing. Patterns are contagious, princesses and crooks. First was raising in the sunshine, then we're hanging by a hook. You can stand above me looking down, but I can see from here it's just a broken ladder. And I would trade my place with you in hell, cause I can say for sure it doesn't even matter. You can stand above me looking down, but I can see from here it's just a broken ladder. And I would trade my place with you in hell, cause I can say for sure it doesn't even matter. You can stand above me looking down, but I can see from here it's just a broken ladder. And I would trade my place with you in hell, cause I can say for sure it doesn't even matter.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to episode 19 of Futurism Forever podcast. Tonight, we're going to be reading Against Academic Teachers by FT Marinetti. So, yeah, it should be good. Let me introduce the panel. Tonight, I'm joined by James, existentialist non gratis, making his debut, and CSD. How's it going, guys?
Going good.
Pretty good.
Cracking on.
Yep. So Existentialist Non Gratis is a YouTuber whose channel I discovered very recently. It's an honor having him on the podcast and having him on the panel tonight. Do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself and let people know the kind of content you cover on your channel?
Yeah, 100%. As mentioned and as seen in the parentheses, the channel is called Existentials Non Grata. I go by that, or you can call me X, whichever you prefer. On the channel, I focus mainly, all my videos so far are basically on the German writer Ernst Jünger, who you may or may not know. Not a lot of content on Jünger out there, so I decided to pick apart that philosopher a bit. We go in depth into some of his greatest works, Storm of Steel, Oymasville, what have you, in like very long 2-hour videos. Or I also do very short, less than 20-minute video essays talking about his World War I days, comparing it even to anime, things like that. I'm taking it right now into other thinkers related to Jünger. So if you like Jünger, you might like my channel, because I'm also going to be doing, Mishima, and even Marinetti and the futures movement. I'm gonna make a few videos on that. So I decided to come on here. I heard that the show today was on Nietzsche, so I'm like, hey, that's the one for me. Took a lot of notes, and I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Great. It's great having you. And I highly recommend his channel to anyone who is not familiar with it yet. If you're into Ernst Junger in the English language, I think it really is the best channel out covering Junger. So highly recommend it. He's a really cool guy too. So it's great having you on, man. Anyways, I guess without further ado, I'll get started with the reading, and then we'll discuss after. It's a pretty short article, so can everybody mute their mics while I read? All right, thanks. Against Academic Teachers by F.T. Marinetti. In our struggle against the professorial passion for the past, we violently reject Nietzsche's ideals and doctrines. I have no choice but to show how utterly mistaken the critics are in labeling us as neo-Nietzscheans. Indeed, all you have to do is peruse the constructive part of the great German philosopher's work to be convinced that his Superman, whose origins lie in the philosophical culture of Greek tragedy, presumes in his creator an enthusiastic return to paganism and mythology. Nietzsche, despite his urge toward the future, will continue to be seen as one of the fiercest defenders of the beauty and greatness of the past. He is a traditionalist who walks upon the peaks of the Thessalian mountains, but alas, terribly encumbered by the longest ancient Greek texts. His Superman is a product of the Greek imagination, spawned from the three great stinking corpses of Apollo, Mars, and Bacchus. He is a mixture of elegant beauty, the warrior's strength, and Dionysian ecstasy, which are manifested in the greatest classical art. We are opposed to this Greek Superman, begat from the dust of libraries, and against him we set the man who was extended by his own labors, the enemy of books, friend of personal experience, pupil of the machine, relentless cultivator of his own will, clear in the flash of his own inspiration, endowed with the feline power of scenting out, with the ability to make split-second judgments, possessing those instincts typical of the wild, intuition, cunning, and boldness. The children of this present generation, who live out their lives between cosmopolitanism, the tide of trade unionism, and the flights of aviators, are like preliminary sketches of the extended man we are preparing. So as to give our attention to him, we abandoned Nietzsche one December evening, leaving him on the doorsteps of a library, which swallowed him in its swinging doors into a comforting, erudite warmth. I very much doubt that Nietzsche would have vomited as we did whenever we read these abominable principles, written with the chalk of imbecility upon the facades of museums, academies, libraries, and universities. You will no longer think. You will no longer paint. You will no longer construct. No one will ever surpass the old masters. All originality is forbidden. Away with folly and eccentricities. You must imitate, imitate, and imitate again. To attain to the artistic paradise, you have to imitate the lives of our saints. But we took no heed of the wise counsel that Nietzsche wished to give us, and we watched in horror as our Italian youth slipped down into the great sewers of intellectualism. That night we slept, and at dawn we clambered up the portals of the academies, museums, libraries, and universities to write this inscription, which is also an answer to Nietzsche's classical Superman, upon them in the heroic charcoal of the workshop. To the earthquake, their only ally, the futurists dedicate these ruins of Rome and Athens. That day their old erudite walls were shaken by our unexpected shouts. Shame on those who allow themselves to be seduced by the demon of admiration. Shame on anyone who admires and imitates the past. Shame on those who prostitute their own genius. You must fight ferociously against these three relentless enemies and corrupters of art, imitation, prudence, and lucre, which can be summed up in one word: cowardice. Cowardice in the face of admirable examples and formulas that have been learned. Cowardice in the face of a need for love, on the one hand, and the fear of poverty on the other, which menace the necessarily heroic life of the artists. Poets, painters, sculptors, musicians, you must fight. Fight whether within or beyond yourselves, as you fought this morning in leaving your beds, against the rule of inertia and somnolence. As the world has need of nothing but heroism, then excuse, as we do, the bloody act of indiscipline carried out by the Palermo student Ladoni, who, regardless of the law, avenged himself on a tyrannical teacher. Traditionalist teachers were entirely to blame for this death. Traditionalist teachers whose wish it is to drown the irrepressible energies of young Italians in their stinking subterranean sewers. When, oh, when will they leave off emasculating those spirits which must create the future? When will they cease teaching the brutalizing adoration of the past, which cannot be surpassed, to children whom they seek to reduce to plodding little courtiers? Let's get moving and make everything all over again. To do so, we have to go against the tide. Soon the moment will come when we shall no longer be content with defending our ideas with slaps and punches. We shall then have to go on the offensive in the name of thought, the artistic offensive, the literary offensive, against glorified scabs and tyrannical teachers. However, the faint-heartedness of our enemies will most likely deprive us of the luxury of killing them. These are by no means paradoxes, believe you me. At all costs, we have to drag Italy out of this crisis of traditionalist cowardice. What would you say, for example, about that futurist plan to introduce a mainline course in risk-taking and physical danger into all our schools, regardless of their own wishes? The pupils will be subjected to the necessity of continually confronting a series of dangers, each one more fearsome than the last, skillfully arranged and always unforeseen, such as fires, drowning, the collapse of a ceiling, or other like disasters. Now courage is absolutely the prime subject, because as far as the great futurist hope is concerned, all authority, all rights, and all powers will be violently torn from the hands of the dead and the dying, and given to young people between 20 and 40 years of age. Just now, while we are waiting for the war with Austria, which we cry out for, there is nothing we find more interesting on this earth than the fine, casual seeming deaths of airmen, which are happening all the time. Blériot was right to voice his opinion. More and more corpses, yet, will be necessary in the name of progress. The only time we care about blood is when it spurts from the arteries. Anything else is cowardice. I have to add that for all these very good reasons, magistrates don't care for us at all. The police keep an eye on us. Priests draw back when we pass by, and the socialists loathe us intensely. This hatred and scorn we reciprocate, for we despise them all as the worthless representatives of pure unworldly ideas such as justice, divinity, equality, and liberty. Since these pure absolute ideas, more than any others, are susceptible to corruption, they can in no way be controlled by the conventionalists. This manifesto was published as a one-page broadsheet in May 1910. The title, Contro I Professore, was changed in Chapter 9 of the collection of Futurism, 1911, into Ce qui nous sépare de Nietzsche. The Italian text was reprinted in Guerra sulla igiene del mondo, 1915, I manifesti del futurismo, 1919, and Futurismo e fascismo, 1924. So that concludes the reading portion. Yeah, it's a very brief article. I kind of like the style. It kind of cuts right to the chase. Like reading it, my internal voice is Marinetti is very impassioned when he's writing this. He does not like being labeled a neo-Nietzschean. So what are your guys' thoughts on his takes on Nietzsche, who he calls a traditionalist?
I know very little about Nietzsche, sadly enough. What about y'all guys?
Well, I took a lot of notes in the margins, and I'll get to Nietzsche in a sec, but the writing style is very, I have to say, very fitting for futurism. I'm just reading off of my notes here, because it talks a lot about the immediate surroundings in a very poetic way, right? I underlined, We abandoned Nietzsche in one December evening, leaving him on the doorstep of a library, right? In its swinging doors into comforting warmth, written with the chalk of imbecility on the facades of museums. And in this sense, he's really talking about the here and now. Now, this is, very contrary to, the worship of tradition and the worship of, past doctrines. But in regards to Nietzsche, I mean, I don't want to uh, talk all that I've written right off the bat, but I do have some, raising concerns, especially given that it seems that the article is really about, being against academic dogma, right? Being against series and preferring lived experience, right? You could compare it to, say, it's analogous to basically the city-state of Athens and the city-state of Sparta. So then, why exactly is Nietzsche the main focus point here, right? Nietzsche, for his time, was very revolutionary, you could say. He was going against Socrates. He was going against Plato. He was going against, the religion of the day, which is Christianity. I mean, he was the one that philosophized with the hammer. So, yeah, there's a lot of questions that I'm raising at here. Why Marinetti framed the essay that he did, and I think that opens up a whole conversation on just who Nietzsche was and who
Yeah.
Marinetti thought Nietzsche was.
The article is very much framed around Nietzsche more so than against academicism in general, which I think depends on the translation. Like at the end, it does mention some of the other titles. The French one was "Ce qui nous sépare de Nietzsche," so like that title is more. Sorry for the French pronunciation. I'm sure that's horrible, but it is like the French translation anyway. The title was advertised as like, I guess like we want to be separated from Nietzsche, I guess is what that means. So like I think he was just kind of resentful that he was being lumped in with Nietzsche when he thought he was doing something different and unique and new, and where he thought like Nietzsche was still like, even revolutionary as he was still kind of looking backwards, and Marinetti didn't see the use for that, for like idolizing ancient Greece or the Greek gods. So
Yeah, I will say this is that like Marinetti's like just the exact opposite of the past. He just rejects the past completely. Even when like thinkers like Nietzsche, when they have very revolutionary elements to them that inspired many revolutionaries of that time, like Rosa Luxemburg and a bunch of other people, like people from the conservative revolution too. But like Nietzsche still like not Nietzsche, Marinetti just like still rejects this because it's like, no, we just have to keep moving forward. On intellectualism, it seems like he's also like just completely against it. Like he attacks one extreme, then he goes to another extreme. And to me, what should be done is that we should have a synthesis of the two, because both of them have valid points to them. Like you can learn stuff from doing stuff in real life and reading books.
So like archaeofuturism, basically, hold on to the traditions that are still vital and have relevance and meaning, but embrace new technologies, still be forward thinking. I was kind of critical of that book when we covered it. I think I was fair to it on the podcast. It was more in private. I was very critical of it. But
to me, a better example would be Giovanni Gentile's definition of fascist intellectualism. That's what I mean by it.
That too. I'm sorry. I've heard like Marinetti and Gentile really butted heads, because Marinetti did want to discard the classics from the curriculum from like education in Italy, whereas Gentile thought that it was important and like it should be held on to, and he didn't want to get rid of it. So like there was some friction there between like the fascist party and Marinetti, who was a member, but he was always kind of an outlier in the party. futurists were like the more radical and a more radical wing in the party, but they were like their own little group. Whereas, yeah, fascism in practice did kind of seek a synthesis between tradition and like ancient Rome and all that with futurism and progressivism and definitely advancing forward.
Yeah.
Um,
I take
beyond
somewhat of
the
I take somewhat of a similar position. I think we have to look at the past to see what they did right and what they did wrong, then to understand our own conditions. But at the same time, understand we cannot go back, and if we could go back, we didn't just redoing all the same mistakes. So we must move forward, but take what we can from the past and learn from their mistakes, instead of just like destroying like the museums and libraries and things of that nature.
Yeah. What's up, Zolt? Hope everything's going well, man. Thanks for watching, dude. Yeah. Just thought I'd acknowledge his comment. So yeah, taking what's valuable from the past, and like you're saying, like we should definitely study history and we should know about it. Like I would agree. The point in futurism, though, is like it's an art movement first and foremost that's meant to inspire revolutionary action in the real world. So, like, there is definitely some poetic flourish going on. How seriously he was about abandoning the past, I think it's pretty clear. Like, he doesn't worship ancient Rome by any stretch. I don't think it did anything for him in practical terms, as far as like putting a curriculum together. Yeah, it probably shouldn't be entirely abandoned. There are valuable lessons that can be learned from history, but I think like in the movement now, like people are way too obsessed with past eras. It's not even just like the quote unquote traditionalists who like worship these like barbecue commercials from the 1950s and get back to like suburbia. People like are way too obsessed with like the original fascist movement or the original National Socialist movement, and like they idolize Hitler or Mussolini or whoever, as if like they have any like real answers to our problems now, as if like the world hasn't evolved 100 years since then.
Yeah.
And the issues are different now. The people are different. The culture is different. Technology is different. Like everything is in flux and always changing. So we cannot like look to the past for solutions to current day problems. Like we have to be more forward thinking and flexible and robust and open-minded, I think.
Yeah, it's not just the third position. I see a lot of Marxists and anarchists fetishize the Soviet Union or anarchist Catalonia, even though these are, like you said, are in similar positions of what the National Socialists in Germany are and what fascist Italy is. They're dead movements and groups that grew up in different conditions than we do, and we need to understand our own conditions more. Not to say we, like I said earlier, we can't take ideas or see where they went wrong or what they did right, but we have to move forward with ourselves. We can't just keep fetishizing the past or think we can go back.
Yeah, it's a good point that like that definitely goes on in Marxist circles and anarchist circles too. They definitely do hero worship also, and they have their heroes that, or they're like eras that they're like obsessed with, or that they think are like the perfect model, and that's where we need to be now, but that's not where we're at. So it's not unique to the right. It definitely goes on the left too.
I also like. Go on. Sorry.
All right. I'll let you go next. Sorry. Yeah, there's really a whole, a return to this past trend that I'm seeing, but there's also another motif that's apparent here, and it's selectively choosing from the past, right? It's bringing it back to the book, right? Nietzsche selectively chose from the past too. He didn't like just any past, or he liked certain past societies, past cultures that he approved of, right? That he categorized as aristocratic. And so, much like how people today, they tend to, when they say they want to go to the past, they want to go to tradition, they're looking at a specific type. And in a weird way, you could apply the same logic to Marinetti if you just replace the word past with the future, right? Marinetti wasn't going, at least I don't think so. He wasn't advocating for the future in its undiscriminated form, right? He was looking for a selective future. And so you could almost say that it was a selective future that didn't qualify as what contemporary people call modernity, right? Right, with its liberalism, with its parliamentary systems, etc., etc. And so in a way, he was a lot like Mishima in that sense. And I'm gonna call you CSD. Sorry, I don't know what to call you, but to your point, CSD. Uh, there's what was I saying? Yeah, in the whole talk about, we have to keep what's valid from the past and then apply it to the future. That's a real valid point, right? But it's a valid point insofar as it is practical. I think a lot of Marinetti's points, as Gio said, was more artistic, poetic, metaphorical, right? So it has to have the aesthetic purpose to it, no matter how dumb it may seem from a practical purpose, because practically solving the problems was less so the point. It was rather, becoming in becoming a certain way approved under futurism. So you could almost say that Nietzsche and the people that Marinetti criticized, his words were, I'm reading off here, sorry, his words were rooted in wisdom, reason, logic, whereas Marinetti, though not exactly, he wasn't lacking in those qualities, but he was more rooted in the sheer passion of his words, right? The movement, the artistic element in the words, not so much the logical reasoning that those words carry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, you can just call me CSD.
In this one section, like that's bolded, like I very much doubt that Nietzsche would have vomited as we did whenever we read these abominable principles written with the chalk of imbecility upon the facades of museums, academies, libraries, and universities. You will no longer think, you will no longer paint, you will no longer construct. No one will ever surpass the old masters. All originality is forbidden. Away with folly and eccentricities. You must imitate, imitate, and imitate again. To attain to the artistic paradise, you have to imitate the lives of our saints. Really, I think like Marinetti feels boxed in by like just having to look up to like all these great men that came before him. He thinks it gets in the way of like people pursuing great things in the here and now and trying to build towards a better future because they're looking in the rear view mirror. Like, they don't have a vision of what Italy needs to be in 100 years or in 1,000 years. Like, they're looking back, like we need to go back to ancient Rome. And the whole point of futurism and fascism in general was to aspire towards an Italy that surpassed the greatness of Rome. So yeah, I mean, be original, be bold, be daring, be audacious. These are like all words that Marinetti uses frequently in his writings, and what he's trying to get Italians to be. And to do that, he thinks you have to let go of the past altogether. A lot of the same characteristics can be found in traditionalism. Like he does glorify heroism and sacrifice and martyrdom. To go back to like the comparison X made with Mishima, like all that's definitely present though in Mishima's writings too, though he frames it differently. There are definitely parallels. And I think like Nietzsche wanted to get back to like those kind of ideals. He thought like modernity was weak and it was turning people into bugmen basically. But I guess they all like had desires to like get to somewhere that was similar. They just framed it in different ways.
Yeah, I was going to say like American traditionalist Richard Weaver, who was agrarian, also talked about heroism, and he also said that like modernity was like destroying heroism. So yeah, I see what you mean by there is some overlap.
Yeah. What
One of
were since we have the Ernst Junger guy on, what were Junger's thoughts on like modern technology and how it was affecting warfare and heroism? I think it is kind of relevant to the discussion. So that's for X, obviously.
All right. Well, I mean, you are free to jump in if you want, but yeah, he's very clear in his technology stance. If you ever read Younger, he does go through a lot of evolution in his changes, but they're more so of how he applies what a few unchanging principles, right? Unchanging lines of thinking, I should say. And one of those lines of thinking was the impact of technological, basically technology on society. And his reasoning was that because technology has basically become so ubiquitous, right? It negated the man behind the machine's need to do the work, essentially. And he called this process total mobilization, in which the entire technological apparatus around the world were mobilized, utilized, and applied to do the work. And then this basically led humans to, not use their own human skills of intuition, right? Heroism, courage, right? Not use those human skills, but to instead relegate themselves to use basically operating the machines. And to put it really simply, you could quote Junger from, I think, Oymersville, where he said World War II was the war in which the technician won over the soldier, right? And just riffing off of Junger here, then attaching it back to Nietzsche. Junger really liked Nietzsche, right? Back in his World War I days, I believe he had read a lot of Nietzsche by then. And again, I'm reading here. But it was actually because of this that Junger had the same contempt for, like the bourgeoisie modern lifestyle that Marinetti had. But then Marinetti is like, no, we don't, as Gio said, no, we don't want to be boxed in. And so what you get is a weird thing where both Junger and Marinetti, because they have the same contempt for certain aspects of modern society. One claims that they are not Nietzschean, the other claims that they are Nietzschean. Heidegger said that Junger was the only genuine follower of Nietzsche. And furthermore, you could say that Junger was a lot more critical of technology. So you get a lot of commonalities and contradictions with Junger and Marinetti existing at the same time. And then I was like thinking about this while Gio was talking, and then I thought, wait a minute. Even though Nietzsche did, whether Marinetti would like it or not, Marinetti and Nietzsche objectively did talk about the same ideas, right? They talked about how, Marinetti talked about how he doesn't want to be defined by the doctrines of the past. That's literally, something that you would find in such books or etc. Marinetti talked about how he didn't like the comfortable lives of modern cosmopolitan people. That's literally the last man incarnate, right? So then it's like, wait a minute, with all these similarities, why is Marinetti so against Nietzsche? And then Gio pointed out that it was what Marinetti didn't like was that he didn't like to be boxed in, right? He didn't want to be defined by Nietzsche. So what you get is he doesn't want to be defined by someone that agrees with him on a lot of points, because it doesn't matter, because what matters is the fact that Marinetti thinks it is a certain way, right? Um if Marinetti thinks that The Last Man is not a good thing, and Nietzsche said that earlier, it doesn't matter. Marinetti doesn't want to be defined by Nietzsche. If Marinetti says, The Last Man is good, and Nietzsche said the opposite, again, it doesn't matter because he doesn't want to be defined by Nietzsche. So really what you get is, it's not really a contradiction that Nietzsche said the same thing as Marinetti, because what Marinetti is going for is, it doesn't matter who said it before me. I want to pave my own path. And if someone before me said the same thing, that's great. That's a coincidence, and it has no bearing on today, because ultimately Marinetti wants to define today and the future. So I think that's really how you can resolve the similarities between Nietzsche and Marinetti in an albeit convoluted way. So sorry to go off on a tangent. I know you asked about Junger, but then I kind of
Yeah, that's all good.
I've recently started reading the Force passage, and if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, X. But from what I understand, Junger kind of criticizes technology because he believes it has made people like lose some of the skills they used to have, and he also believes that it's allowed more authoritarian governments to arise about. Is that like a correct assessment, or am I wrong?
Yeah. So no, you're exactly right. And the Forest Passage is really different from something that you would see in The Worker. But like I said, that underlying principle of critique on technology is still prevalent all throughout his life. And yeah, so you mentioned, technology has allowed people to lose certain traits, right? Well, that's what I said by, traits like heroism and courage, right? You don't need, um, you know, I mean, if you have heroism and courage, that's great. But it's what's more important is you know how to operate a computer, right? That does the attacking for you. You know how to operate a drone strike that does the mission for you. You don't have to go out there and then think about your own, rely on your own human ingenuity and say, okay, how can I get the mission done and then come back, right? So that's what really that's where the whole critique on technology lies. And in regards to the Forest Passage, right, it's very interesting that in the Forest Passage, Junger basically frames it as, all right, here's, because you mentioned the authoritarian stuff. So here's the authoritarian stuff. A lot of it has to do with technology. So we're going to take a passage into I don't want to say a safe space, but, a zone of refuge where you can continue resistance, right? Hence the Forest Passage. So really, it's a very spatial uh, it's a spatial dynamic, right? There's something going on, so I'm gonna exit myself from it and then continue my resistance. It's very much like what you would see in the Marble Cliffs, right? If you ever read it. So why that's interesting is because you could compare that to Oymasville, where in Oymasville, the resistor is basically not resisting. He transcended both space and time. And what that allows him to do is basically, no matter how authoritarian the society gets, he can remain in society, but then transcend all that and then let it pass through him. And that might seem very convoluted. It is, but if you read Oymasville, you already figure it out. So if you read Forest Passage, CST, I highly recommend Oymasville. It's a great book. So, and you can really tell how he's dealing with time and technology, right? And I say time because what Marinetti's trying to, transcend modern society by, going into the future. So that's also time, but he's transcending temporally, but Junger is basically transcending time itself. And in this sense, time kind of, as Junger would put it, dissolves into the absolute, right? So there essentially is no past and no future. And so you could almost say that's like a step above futurism, depending on how you look at it.
Do you want to elaborate on Ernst Junger's concept of the anarch a little bit? 'Cause it is like very much of interest to me.
Okay,
'Cause
sure.
yeah, like go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. So, the anarch is really hard to define, but um, once I start explaining with examples, it gets a bit easier. So imagine in any this is great because I actually talked about it a lot on the Telegram. So in any object that you would find, right? Junger is basically saying that there is a substance, an essence that is behind the object that makes the object what it is, right? And then that essence is basically like a potential that can manifest in any direction. But then once it becomes a but then once it applies itself into an object, it is no longer anarchic. So the anarch is that which is behind the object that makes the object the object. And that might seem a bit complicated, but then to put it in examples, Junger would say, love is anarchic, but the marriage is not, because in marriage, it's a fixed system, right? Conventionally, two people, usually man and woman, are together. I've never been married, so I don't know, but I take it like until death do us apart, something. So really there's a fixed teleological path, right? A to B. But then with love, right? Love is anarchic. So you can basically take it in any direction. You could get married, you don't have to get married, whatever. And so how is this relevant in any way to technology or whatever? Well, if you're living in a society, right, that's framed a certain way, because societies have their own systems, how they function, their own culture, etc. By trying to resist it, right? He calls this, by fitting into the role of the partisan, right? By trying to actively resist it, you become someone that is stuck in the same frame as the system that you are in, right? By fighting the system, you become within the same, basically the same system.
Your life still revolves around the system. You're antagonistic towards it, but it still defines you.
Exactly. So I like to think of it how if you're an anarchist, right, which is not the anarch. If you're an anarchist, your whole meaning as an anarchist basically dissolves. It's over when your mission is accomplished.
Yeah.
But if you can tap into something behind the anarchist, right, the person behind the anarchist, then system or no system, you could still be there, and that way you could transcend the system, right? Love can transcend marriage, right? And that's really interesting because it has very transcendental element to it. I did a video comparing it to the anime Perfect Blue, and I talked about how I don't want to give the spoilers. I talked about how by being so lost in your job, right? And just straight out of Fight Club, dude. By being so lost in your job, you kind of forget who you are, and then your whole existence is tied to that employment. So then, if you get fired or something, it's like, well, you fall into an existential crisis. So like, who am I? But then, if you're able to, tap into the person behind the employee, then you basically tapped into the anarch to, situate it in like modern contemporary terms. And then, now, my final point is, how is this relevant to Marinetti? Well, in my Telegram, I in the Futurism Forever Telegram, I talked about how, okay, so Junger was very critical of technology, and so was his brother, right, Frederick Junger, right? And then, how does that reconcile with Marinetti, who was like all about technology? And then I basically said, well, could it be that Marinetti wasn't so much for technology, but he was for that which made it so beautiful, right? He was for the speed behind the automobiles, right? He was for the violence in super fast planes, etc. So basically, Marinetti too was trying to tap into the anarchic behind the technological objects that he was seeking out for, and that's why I can't say the quote because I don't speak Italian and I don't never try to pronounce it, but anyone familiar with futurism will know where he says, Marinetti says, uh, the beauty of the race car is more beautiful than the victory at wherever. And then I basically said, well, what makes the race car beautiful is in fact more beautiful than the race car itself. And which is basically saying that Marinetti was tapping into the anarch, right? He was saying that what make the anarchic is more beautiful than the object that the anarchic is applied to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Back to the text. I really did like this line. I've always liked this line. Gloria was right to voice his opinion. More and more corpses yet will be necessary in the name of progress. The only time we care about blood is when it spurts from the arteries. Anything else is cowardice. Does anyone have thoughts on that line specifically?
I do. I do.
Go
This
ahead.
is something that I find very interesting with Marinetti and futurism that separates it from other progressive ideologies. A lot of times you'll find that traditionalists will critique people who are progressive by saying that progress, like a lot of progressive thinkers like Francis Fukuyama, Bertrand Russell, and Karl Marx believes that we're going to eventually get to this like utopia where we're going to all hold hands and sing kumbaya. But traditionalists are like, no, technology has made us lose stuff, but in particular has made war more violent. Marinetti is one of the few progressive thinkers that says, no, we're not going to reach this utopia. It's fucking bullshit. And the struggle, which yes, traditionalists are right. Yeah, it's going to be more violent, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, he kind of embraces the violence. And his article, War, the Only Hygiene of the World, he criticizes anarchists for being too utopian. And like, yeah, to go back to what X was saying, like as soon as the system is, as they accomplish their goal, like they lose all meaning. And like, they just have like this idyllic kind of vision of like utopia and like universal peace or something. And they lose all the struggle and all the things that really give life its meaning. Anything that would like kind of give man drive to do great things. You know, utopia is a great idea, but like in practice, like I think it would get kind of boring. Like, you know, what are you even working towards anymore?
Yeah.
You know, you need adversaries to overcome and like barriers to conquer. You know,
We see
that
in
is
modern,
what gives life meaning. So, you know,
yeah,
we don't
we
want
see,
to lose that.
yeah, we see in modern American society where a lot of basic necessities, along with a whole lot of other stuff that we don't necessarily need, has not made people more happy. In fact, it's just made people like kill themselves out of boredom, whether it be drug overdoses, eating themselves to death, alcoholism, etc.
I'll be BRB. Talk amongst yourselves.
Okay.
All right. Oh, yeah, man. Well, yeah, and then you know you could almost say that Marinetti was utopian deliberately, right? In the sense that um, his goal too was unreachable, right? Because um, things like because you know violence in its of itself isn't reachable in its absolute sense, right? It's only reachable in matters of degrees, right? You could be violent or you could be more violent, but you can never become the violence. And in this sense, this is what makes something like futurism as perseverant as the utopians that you're talking about, right? Because when you say utopians, you're more talking about idealistic people, right? People that want a, you know, yeah, people want all their needs met, and then thinking it will bring them happiness. The reason why they're perseverant is because uh, they're never going to reach that goal. That's why they keep trying to reach it. And so it's very ironic that Gio said, you know, it's you know we need adversary, we need these barriers to give us meaning. Well, the fact that you're trying to reach a a utopia that has no barrier, that has no adversary, is the barrier, and it is the adversary, and therefore it is what makes them keep going for that utopia, right? like I said, if your existence revolves around being an anarchist, then once your goal is accomplished, you lose all meaning. But that assumes that your goal is accomplished. But if it can't be accomplished, then you will have perpetual meaning. And in this sense, they're no different from Marinetti, right? They might be different in the sense that Marinetti was an idealistic.
Your mic is actually cutting out.
Sorry about that. Is this better?
Yeah, you sound good now.
Oh crap. When was the last thing you heard?
Um,
Oh wait, maybe you're the wrong person to ask. CST, what was the last thing you heard?
I just got back. Yeah.
I don't remember.
All right. I'll give you a TLDR. Marinetti is not idealistic, but he is utopian in the sense that they're both accomplishing a unreachable goal, right? Marinetti could be violent, he could be more violent, but he can never become the violence. And Gio said, the ridiculous thing about utopian is that you need adversary, you need barriers to give yourself meaning. But the fact that but the fact that you can never reach that is the adversary, right? The fact that you can never get rid of all barriers is the barriers, and that's why the utopians never give up. And this is why Marinetti is, in a sense, even though he's not idealistic, he is a utopian.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah.
I would say that futurism in this way is somewhat incomplete because it just believes in struggle for the sake of struggle. Sure, it'll at times attach nationalism to itself or socialism for matter in the case of the Russian futurists, but for the most part, they just get enjoyment out of the struggle. When most people,
What's wrong with that?
Wait, just let me finish, James. When they want to struggle is a natural part of human existence, no doubt about it. But a lot of people will struggle for things that mean something to them, not just for the struggle for the sake of struggle.
I think Marinetti, Italy and building a great Italy that surpasses ancient Rome was very important to him. He was authentically an Italian ultra nationalist, and the glorification of war that goes on in futurist texts. You have to place it in its historical context. Prior to the Risorgimento, there wasn't really a shared Italian identity, a national identity. There were various regional identities that were often in conflict with each other. So the Risorgimento kind of made Italy a legal entity. On paper, it was a unified country, but spiritually, it was not unified. And the futurists and the fascists also really pushed for Italy's involvement in World War I because it would give them a shared struggle that they could all unite around as Italians. And that's a huge part of forming identity and carving out a shared history, a shared mythos that Italians can unite around. So the glorification of war and struggle was inherently connected to their search for an Italian identity, or trying to formulate or found something tangible for Italians to unite around and to relate to each other around. If that makes
That's
sense.
true. Yeah, that's a good point.
I actually want to respond to that, but James, did you want to go ahead?
No, I got nothing.
All right.
There's nothing wrong with struggle for the sake of struggle.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, right? You mentioned, on the one hand, there's a struggle for the sake of struggle, but then Gio, you mentioned, well, hey, what about that whole nationalism thing, right? What about that whole Italian identity? I think you said they're connected in a way, but then you could question yourself, okay, were they connected, and was the whole struggle leading up to the higher meaning of that national identity, or was it the other way? Was Marinetti trying to have that national identity for the sake of to co-opt it, incorporate into that struggle for its own sake, right? To get that futuristic aesthetic. So was he saying, look, we have to struggle for that national ideal, or should we take that national ideal and struggle for it for the sake of struggle? So maybe in that sense, and I don't know if it's true, but if it is true, then um, the struggle itself becomes more of an overbear than the national identity part just becomes one of many numerators over the denominators of the struggle for itself. And one film that you could compare to is No Country for Old Men. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but and actually this was one of my first videos, so the video isn't that good, but the idea I really think applies here, because um, when there were these traditionalist archetype manifested by the sheriff, right? They wanted to return to tradition, to the simple days. Um, he was very black-pilled because he was seeing all the chaos unfold around that he couldn't make sense of, right? And then what he was trying to do was he was trying to stick to a past, right? Which is this kind of brings it back to the text here. The sheriff was trying to stick back to the safety of his past because that's where he was able to comprehend life, right? And then on the other hand, the protagonist was more so accepting of his fate, right? He was accepting of his fate, and then he was trying to do what he wanted to do, not to defy death, but to live as much as he could before fate, before death got to him. And you could say this is very comparable to Marinetti, right? This earlier CSD, you said, we have to take some traditional values, because or else we're just gonna fall into chaos. Well, maybe that's the point, right? Maybe Marinetti is trying to do that. Maybe Marinetti is glorifying the struggle for sake, not struggle to make a better life, not struggle to make sense of it all as a sheriff, different from No Country for Old Men, but rather to struggle itself, right? And so it's a very I used to say the word as a meme, post-existentialist, but maybe it could apply here, right? Where the existentialists say, life is meaningless, so you have to create meaning. But then, whereas Marinetti was more so along the lines of life is meaningless, and by the way, not because of, but by the way, we are trying to create this meaning, and Marinetti found in the struggle. Now, I haven't read a lot of futurism, so you're gonna have to correct me if I'm wrong there, but that's just my take. But basically, the gist of what I just said is, was nationalism a goal that they had, or was that goal relegated to the struggle itself?
Now that I think about it, I remember reading the Futurist Manifesto and Marinetti saying in the manifesto that that in his 40s he can't wait for them to be destroyed by a new younger generation. So I think that answers your question that the struggle wasn't for the unification of Italy, but the unification of Italy was just part of the grand struggle that they wanted to have.
Exactly, yeah. It's and bringing it back to quoting it from the thing, right? The faint-heartedness of our enemies will most likely deprive us of the luxury of killing them. Well, that's basically just saying, focused on perpetual growth, and then there are outdated people along the way that won't keep up with that, right? And then what you're implying there from the manifesto there, CSD, is that, well, Marinetti is gonna become one day the enemy that is faint-hearted, that will, he's gonna be the faint-hearted enemy, and then again, this is very interesting that there's just so much commonality with Nietzsche, right? When Marinetti says the faint-heartedness of our enemies will most likely deprive us of the luxury of killing them, that's almost the same as Nietzsche saying, the weak and ill-fated shall perish, first rule of our misanthropy.
Yeah. Although in this text, Marinetti kind of goes hard against Nietzsche. Like, I do pick up on a lot of Nietzscheanism in futurism also. Like, the will to power is just inherently central to it. And though he frames it differently, like, futurists do have their conception of a new man. They refer to it as the mechanical man as opposed to the Superman. But there are parallels that could be drawn. I think he just didn't want to be too closely associated with
Exactly.
Nietzscheanism because he thought he was founding something new and completely original and unique. And
Yeah.
he wanted futurism to stand on its own 2 feet, and not just be lumped into like a weird derivative of Nietzscheanism. So there was
Yeah.
probably some egotism involved. Like, I'm Marinetti, I'm better than Nietzsche, like, you know. But that's just I'm just guessing as far as that goes, as far as like motivations. But
Well, that's what I meant, right? Because no, because that's the whole. You just basically were spot on with my point there, that it was less about the being common with Nietzsche, and it was more about, hey, I'm not Nietzsche. I don't care that Nietzsche exactly said the same thing as I did. In some parts, uh, I'm not letting the past define my future. Essentially, so what that basically means is that the anything that I agree with from the past is just a coincidence, right? I'm gonna say it with my own voice from now on. So um, you know, I'm not a neo-Nietzschean. I am a futurist.
yeah, something completely new and separate from
Exactly.
everything that came before it. Um, though I do think he did probably read Nietzsche and did absorb it in
Um,
parts.
yeah. If you, oh, I can't. Yeah. If you look at the, I don't know if yeah, you have the same book that I do, right?
Yeah,
Um, yeah. If you look at, so there's like little footnotes in throughout the book, and
yeah,
then in one of them, it talks about how he was Nietzsche was scribbled all over the notes, poems, and writings that Marinetti had in his younger days. So yeah, a lot of it's again like the irony is that by saying I'm not Nietzschean, he's literally committing the Nietzschean classic Nietzschean cycle of camel lion child, right? Like but because he says I'm not Nietzschean, but then he spent his past years taking notes meticulously on Nietzsche. So that's the camel phase. And then on the lion phase, the article itself is basically the lion phase. It says, I'm not Nietzsche. And so what's next is the child phase is I'm going to create my own thing, right? I'm going to create my own values, and that's futurism. So by saying I am not Nietzsche, you could almost say that he's being Nietzschean. But then again, the point here is that commonalities with past doctrines isn't the point. The point is that he's gonna say it with his own mind, basically. And so um, that's what I think the biggest takeaway is, that no matter how common he might be with Nietzsche, it's more so important to note that um, what Marinetti wanted to do was to um, just create his own thing, basically, not be defined by the past, no matter how common he was with it.
yeah. And we renounce our symbolist masters. He does mention like strong influences on, like he rejects the symbolists and he rejects those who came before him. But in one section, he does mention like 5 people who were influences on futurism, and like I haven't heard of a lot of them, but there are 2. Emily Zora, who I have not read, but like I'm kind of like somewhat familiar with, and Walt Whitman of all people. And like on that episode, none of us could really see the connection between futurism and Walt Whitman. Yeah, like it's one of the few people who Marinetti name drops as like being an influence on him. I think it must be just stylistically as a poet rather than the actual content. But yeah, so like I mean, he does reject most people who came before him, but for some reason he has some weird affinity for Walt Whitman. I don't know. I'm not sure if I had a point with that. I just do you see any similarities between Walt Whitman and Marinetti and futurism? Or,
Never heard of the guy. So
oh, word. Okay, he was like an American naturalist poet. I read like Leaves of Grass. I think it's called, like years ago when I was in high school. I hardly remember it now, but very much not futurist. But Marinetti seems to think otherwise. So I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that.
Well, I was gonna take it somewhere, but then it's not on Whitman, unfortunately.
All right, all right. Where were you gonna take it?
Yeah. Well, listen. Like I established that Marinetti was trying to get into that, tap into the anarchic potential, right? The speed
Yeah,
behind, what made the race car more beautiful rather than the actual beauty of the race car, right? The anarch behind the race car, and then I've been thinking a bit about Junger, and then we've established that the anarch, like futurism, was able to transcend the times, right? At the Junger more so because, like I said, Marinetti transcended by going to the future, but then Junger was able to go outside of time itself. And then in Neumannsville, he said another thing where to become anarchic, I'm paraphrasing, I don't know the exact quote. To become anarchic, you have to have an understanding and appreciation of history. Okay, well then that ties into what CST said, where you have to know because not because CST was basically saying not only do you have to know tradition, but you have to know what works for your current context, right? And then well that's understanding, that's appreciation of history. And then Junger saying, well, if you have those two, those are prerequisites to become anarchic. And then we've established that the anarchic is a transcendental element that Marinetti was going for. All right, well, what that means is, hey, maybe by becoming so attached to the past, right, it's going to prevent you from becoming a futurist, right? It's going to prevent you from transcending the transcending time to the degree that Marinetti did. But then so yeah, if you attach yourself to the past, you won't be able to go where Marinetti did. But then by doing that which allows you to go where Marinetti went, which is negating the past, that won't allow. Wait, hold on, where's the camera? That won't allow you to go where Junger went. So it kind of goes full circle. It's almost like you could imagine like the IQ meme, where like the
yeah,
dumbest and the smartest people are saying the same thing. Where Marinetti's like you have to abandon past history and tradition, and then the dumb guy is saying, "What? Here we go." The dumb guy is saying, "Well, we have to understand tradition," but then he doesn't really take it anywhere. And then Yuger's saying, "Yeah, we have to understand tradition to go beyond Marinetti." So I thought that was really cool, worth mentioning.
so you're saying Marinetti is the midwit in that meme?
Yeah, well, it's better. It's better than being at the bottom, eh?
Yeah, true. Yeah, we've been going for a little over an hour. James, you haven't said much. You mentioned you were going to do a reading this weekend. What are you going to read?
The revolt against poultry.
And who's that by?
The I can't really pronounce the guy's name.
It's Antonin Artaud,
Yeah,
correct? What
yeah.
do you like about it, Antonin Artaud?
I was just finding like an interesting surrealist.
Yeah, you kind of got 86 by the surrealist community, like Salvador Dali did too, for his political views. He was like a crazy person too. Like
Yeah.
he went to mental institutions and shit. I still have not read any Artaud. Alcaz is really into him and he wants us to cover him on the podcast. I'm open to it, but whenever I put it in the poll, like no one votes for it except Alcaz. But James is going to do a reading for his channel Cabaret Voltaire, which is more centered around Dadaism and surrealism than futurism. But James covers a lot of the stuff that I don't have time to on this channel. Everyone should check his channel out. He's a really great guy. And yeah, like since you're on the panel, I'll try to get you to talk a little bit more. But yeah, we're going to do our Francis Picabia special in December too. And we're going to read some Francis Picabia poems. So that should be fun. Anyways, final thoughts on Against Academic Teachers before we wrap up.
Well, I thought it was a great read. It's very simple, but a lot of ideas that evidently we unpacked from. Really appreciate you having me on here. I'd like to do it again if that's cool with you guys, because I
Yeah,
enjoyed it.
anytime. It was great having you on, and everyone sub to his channel, Existentialist Non Grata. If you're into Junger or the kinds of things we talked about tonight, you'll find a lot to like in his channel. I'm a big fan of his channel, and yeah. CSD. Final thoughts before we wrap
Uh,
up.
What I like about Marinetti is that even though I disagree with him on almost everything, I do like how everything's very short and simple and is very easy to understand. And I liked how this conversation played out. I thought we had a pretty good back and forth between all of us.
Yeah, Marinetti's writings are like punk rock. They're very simple and not pretentious and to the point and direct. And I love that about Marinetti. I do see a lot of parallels between the futurist movement and like the punk movement in the 70s and like how they thought like the old rock stars were pompous and pretentious and boring. And, we need to destroy all that shit and create a new type of art, new type of music that cuts back to the essence of what rock and roll is supposed to be, which is rebellious and aggressive and kind of dangerous. And that had been lost in like 1970s rock. Anyway, I'm just rambling though.
Just one final thought is that I also like how it's poetic. So, like, I like Marinetti's poetic writing style, so it doesn't make the text ever boring.
Yeah, no, he's a great writer, a great poet, and he's always a pleasure to read. Yeah, that's why I do Futurism forever. He's my favorite. Anyway, thanks to my panelists for coming on. Thanks to the audience for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And we will be back next weekend with chapter, I think we're on 5 or 6 of the Bonneau Gang. The gang forms, that will be next weekend. And we got the Surrealist Manifesto by Andre Breton coming up soon. So thanks for listening. Thanks for attending. And yeah, take it easy. Salute.